She mopped floors, kept to herself. No one knew her name. But when a Navy SEAL saw the tattoo on her forearm and whispered, "Ma'am," everything stopped. Because the woman they'd ignored wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The stories like this give you chills. Subscribe now. This one's going to stay with you. Most people at the Carson Military Research Center didn't even know the janitor's name. Hell, I'm not sure anyone bothered to ask. She was just there every morning before the sun came up, every evening long after the last office light went out, pushing that squeaky cart with the broken wheel, wearing the same faded navy jumpsuit that looked like it had seen better decades. You know how it is with people who work those invisible jobs. The cleaning crew, the maintenance staff, the security guards on the night shift. They become part of the background. Human furniture. You walk past them 1,000 times and never really see them. The younger staff called her, the old lady who never talks. The security guards barely glanced up when she badged in at 4 a.m. sharp every single day for 3 years straight. Same routine, same route, same methodical silence, day after day after day. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Cross, but nobody knew that either. Nobody cared enough to look past the name tag that was so faded you couldn't read it anyway. Nobody knew she kept her mop handle in her right hand to hide the scar tissue wrapped around her left wrist like twisted rope. Souvenirs from a night in Somalia when she'd had to cut herself free from zip ties while enemy fighters searched the building above her. Nobody noticed how she always, and I mean always, checked the emergency exits before she started mopping a new section. Muscle memory from 15 years of operations where knowing your exit routes meant the difference between completing the mission and never coming home. Nobody thought it was strange that she'd pause outside the communications room each night, just listening to those radio frequencies hum, head tilted like she was analyzing something. They figured she was just an old woman taking a breather. What they didn't know was that Cross could identify encrypted communication patterns in her sleep. Could tell you which frequencies were being monitored, which ones were being jammed, which ones shouldn't be active at all. Old habits die hard when those habits kept you alive for 15 years as one of the first female Navy SEALs. They should have noticed. But when you're invisible for long enough, people stop seeing you altogether. And Sarah Cross had been perfecting the art of invisibility since the day she'd been told her country needed her to disappear. The day that changed everything started like any other Wednesday. I can picture it perfectly because I've heard this story from 4 different people now, and they all remember it the same way. Probably because it's the kind of moment that burns itself into your memory. A group of recently deployed SEALs was getting the standard tour through the secure wing. You know the drill, show the young operators how their intelligence gets processed, where their mission briefs come from, make them feel connected to the bigger machine. Young operators, sharp as razor blades, the kind who still had that look in their eyes like they could take on the world and win. But there was something different about this group. 3 of them were women. Times had changed since Cross's day, when she had to fight just for the right to try out. Cross was mopping the main corridor when they passed. Didn't look up, didn't break stride, didn't even slow down. Just kept working like she always did, like she was part of the architecture. The group was animated, talking about their last deployment in voices that carried that particular mix of confidence and exhaustion that comes from being young and having just survived something most people couldn't imagine. But one of them, the youngest woman, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back tight and shoulders that carried themselves with military precision, she stopped. Just stopped dead in her tracks like she'd walked into an invisible wall. The others kept walking, their voices echoing down the hallway, talking about some training exercise in Virginia or a mission in the Persian Gulf. But this woman, Petty Officer First Class Maria Santos, was staring. Not at Cross's face, not at her uniform, but at her forearm. Because Cross's sleeve had pulled up just enough when she'd reached to wring out her mop. Just enough to show it. A tattoo in tight black script, faded by decades but still readable to someone who knew what to look for. To most people it would have looked like any other military tattoo. Every veteran's got ink telling their story, right? But Maria had grown up in the military community. Her mother was Navy, her aunt was Army Special Forces, and her older sister had done 3 tours with Marine Force Recon. Maria knew military tattoos. And she knew that DevGru meant something very specific. Something that was whispered about in certain circles but never talked about officially. The Naval Special Warfare Development Group. The most elite of the elite. And she knew that in 2004, there weren't supposed to be any women in DevGru. Officially, women weren't even allowed in combat roles until 2013. The young SEAL's breath caught in her throat. You could hear it in the sudden silence. And then, so quiet you almost missed it, barely more than a whisper, she said, "Ma'am?" Cross looked up. For the first time in God knows how long, she actually looked up from her work and made eye contact with someone. Their eyes met across 8 feet of polished linoleum, and something shifted in the air between them. Not fear, not confusion. Recognition. The kind that goes bone deep. The kind that speaks to something primal about warriors recognizing other warriors, even across decades and different uniforms and the vast gulf between legend and reality. The SEAL took a step back like she'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, she had. "Something wrong, Santos?" one of the instructors called back, noticing that their group was suddenly one person short. But Maria couldn't answer. Her mouth was dry, her heart was hammering, and she just kept staring at that tattoo like it was going to disappear or transform into something else. Because in her mind she was doing the math. DevGru. 2004, Echo Team. The stories her instructor at BUD/S used to tell after hours, always ending with, "But that operation never officially happened, and if anyone asks, I never told you this story." "Santos, you coming or what?" Maria forced herself to move to catch up with the group. But she kept looking back over her shoulder at the janitor who had gone back to mopping like nothing had happened. Within 10 minutes of the tour ending, Maria was in the bathroom with her phone out, typing a text to her old instructor. "Master Chief, need to ask you about something. Call me when you get this. It's urgent." Within an hour her phone was ringing. "Santos, what's this about? You sounded rattled." "Master Chief, those stories you used to tell us about the black operations, the teams that worked off books. You ever mention anyone from DevGru Echo 2004? Long silence on the other end. Then, "Where did you hear that designation?" "I think I just met one of them. She's working as a janitor at Carson Research." Another silence, longer this time. "That's impossible, Santos. Those operators are all dead." "Are you sure about that?" By afternoon, someone at the Pentagon was having a very bad day. Because word travels fast in certain circles. And when word spreads that a woman who was supposed to be dead 15 years ago is pushing a mop cart through a secure facility, people start making phone calls. The kind of phone calls that wake up retired admirals and make civilians in expensive suits very nervous. They tried to handle it delicately at first. You know how bureaucrats are, always hoping they can make problems disappear with the right combination of paperwork and plausible deniability. "Ma'am, we just need to verify some information for our records," the young officer said, trying to sound official but not threatening. He'd been sent by someone way above his pay grade to have what his superiors called an informal conversation with the janitor. Cross was in the supply closet, taking inventory of cleaning supplies with the same methodical precision she'd once used to inventory weapons and medical supplies for covert operations behind enemy lines. She looked at the officer with those green eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that had watched teammates die and enemies surrender and civilians caught in between pay the price for both. "I already gave you everything 15 years ago," she said, not stopping her count of paper towels. That one sentence hit the officer like a punch to the gut. Because it confirmed what they'd all been hoping wasn't true. That sentence sent ripples through the chain of command like a stone through still water. Within hours, secure phone lines were buzzing between the Pentagon, Langley, and facilities whose names don't appear on any organizational chart. Because the last time anyone had seen Lieutenant Commander Sarah Cross, she was being extracted from a compound in Syria with 3 bullet wounds and half her team in body bags. The after-action report was stamped with so much classified ink it looked like abstract art. The mission had been so far off the books that even the black budget didn't have a line item for it. The only reason her name wasn't etched into the memorial wall was because officially, Sarah Cross and her entire unit had never existed in the first place. But here she was, graying at the temples, wearing a janitor's uniform with her name tag so faded you couldn't read it, asking if they needed her to empty the trash cans before she left for the day. The Pentagon liaison who showed up that evening was a woman named Admiral Patricia Hayes. 25 years in naval intelligence, the kind of officer who'd seen enough classified files to know that reality is usually stranger and messier than fiction. She pulled a file marked Echo Dark 2004 from her briefcase, one of only 2 copies in existence. Inside, one photograph that was mostly shadows and redacted text, one paragraph of mission summary that was more black ink than actual words, and a red diagonal stamp that read. Except Sarah Cross was standing right in front of her, very much alive, and asking if anyone wanted coffee from the break room. "Lieutenant Commander," Hayes said, and something in her voice made it clear this wasn't a question. "We need to talk." Cross nodded once. "Conference room B is empty. I cleaned it an hour ago." They sat across from each other at a table that Cross had been wiping down with disinfectant every day for 3 years. Hayes spread the file contents on the table like she was dealing cards. "Why didn't you come back?" she finally asked. "After Syria, after everything went sideways. Why didn't you come home?" Cross looked at the photograph. 6 people in desert camouflage, faces mostly obscured by night vision gear and tactical equipment, but their eyes visible. Young eyes, confident eyes, eyes that belonged to people who believed they were making a difference. They told me not to, she said simply. You see, after Syria, after the compound was secured and the package was retrieved and the world went quiet except for the sound of helicopters in the distance. After Cross had pulled 2 wounded civilians out of a building while enemy fire chewed up the walls around her like angry hornets. After she'd held that position for 6 hours until extraction arrived. After all that, she'd found something in that compound that changed everything. Financial records. Communication logs. Proof that certain American defense contractors had been selling weapons to terrorist organizations. Proof that someone wearing the same uniform Cross wore had been trading American lives for deposits in offshore accounts. When Cross tried to report it through proper channels, funny thing happened. Her commanding officers went quiet when she walked into a room. Her security clearance got reviewed for reasons that were never quite explained. Her medical leave got extended indefinitely while paper pushers shuffled her file between departments that didn't seem to exist. And then one gray morning at Bethesda Naval Hospital, while Cross was recovering from surgery to remove shrapnel from her shoulder, 2 people in expensive suits walked into her room without knocking, sat down in chairs they hadn't been offered, and presented her with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Disappear and live quietly somewhere far from anyone who might recognize her, or keep talking about what she'd found and be remembered as a traitor who'd compromised national security and gotten good people killed with her reckless accusations. They had documents ready to prove their version of events. Testimony from surviving team members who swore Cross had disobeyed direct orders. Evidence that she'd been psychologically unstable, suffering from PTSD-induced paranoia. All of it fabricated, but convincing enough to destroy what was left of her life if she chose to fight it. She chose silence. Cross vanished into the contractor system like a ghost fading into morning mist. Changed her name from Sarah Cross to Sarah Carson with paperwork that was frighteningly easy to obtain. Cut her hair short and dyed it brown, traded her uniforms for civilian clothes, buried her medals so deep in a storage unit in Nevada that she sometimes forgot which state she'd left them in. But she never stopped watching. Never stopped listening to the radio chatter on frequencies that officially didn't exist. Never stopped being exactly what she'd trained to be for 15 years, a hunter, a tracker. A woman who could disappear into any environment and become part of the landscape. The janitor job at Carson was perfect. Security clearance required but not too deep. Background checks that were thorough enough to be convincing but not thorough enough to dig up graves that were supposed to stay buried. And access, maybe not to classified information but to classified people. People who might someday need the kind of help that only a ghost could provide. And that tattoo. That was her one act of rebellion. Her way of saying, I was here. We existed. Some of us still do. The SEAL who'd spotted it, Maria Santos, had grown up hearing stories about the old school operators. Her instructor at BUD/S, Master Chief Rodriguez, had served with people who'd served with legends. Women who could track enemy movement patterns for days just by reading wind patterns and wildlife behavior. Women who could slip through hostile territory like smoke. Who once held off an entire terrorist cell for 12 hours with nothing but determination and the kind of stubbornness that only comes from knowing that innocent lives depend on you not quitting. Rodriguez used to tell these stories after training, when the young SEALs were exhausted and their defenses were down, and they were ready to hear about what excellence actually looked like. Always ending with the same warning, but those operations never officially happened. And if anyone asks, I never told you any of this. Maria had always thought they were just stories. War stories, the kind that get bigger and more impossible every time they're told, until reality becomes legend and legend becomes myth. Turns out the legend was real, and she'd been emptying wastebaskets in Building C for 3 years. What happens now? Hayes asked, closing the file. Cross was quiet for a long time, looking at her hands. Hands that had once been steady enough to defuse improvised explosive devices in total darkness. Gentle enough to provide medical aid to wounded civilians. Strong enough to carry dying teammates through landscapes that belonged in nightmares. Now I go back to work, she said. The floors aren't going to mop themselves. But Hayes wasn't finished. The country owes you. The country told me to disappear. I did. We're even. What if we need you again? Cross looked up at her then, and Hayes saw something in those green eyes that made her remember why women like Sarah Cross were worth being afraid of and worth fighting alongside in equal measure. Then you know where to find me. Word spreads fast in the military community, especially word about ghosts who turn out to be real. Within a week, Maria Santos was back at the facility. Not for a tour this time, not with a group of other SEALs. Just her, carrying a cup of coffee and a story she needed to hear from the source. She found Cross in the supply closet at 6:30, restocking cleaning supplies with the same methodical precision she'd probably once used to prep equipment and check weapons before missions that never officially happened. "Ma'am?" Cross turned around. Up close, Maria could see details she'd missed from the hallway. The way Cross's left shoulder sat slightly higher than her right, old injury, probably from carrying heavy equipment across terrain that wasn't meant for walking. The small scar above her right eye that had the clean, straight line of surgical repair. The calluses on her hands that didn't come from pushing mop handles. "You don't need to call me that. That rank belonged to someone else. Master Chief Rodriguez told me stories about your unit, about what you accomplished." Cross's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Rodriguez is still teaching? Just retired last year. But yeah, he taught half the women I came up with." Maria paused, trying to find the right words. "He said you were the best he ever saw at intelligence gathering. Said you could predict enemy movements before they knew them themselves. Rodriguez was a good sailor. Solid operator. He said you saved his unit twice." Cross shrugged, the gesture of a person who'd learned not to take credit for doing what needed to be done. "We all saved each other. That's how it works." Maria had come with a dozen questions. But now that she was here, face to face with a legend who looked like any other aging veteran trying to make an honest living, only one question mattered. Would you tell me about them? About your team?" Cross was quiet for so long that Maria thought she'd overstepped, asked for something that couldn't be shared. But then Cross reached into her back pocket and pulled out a wallet that looked older than Maria was. From it, she carefully extracted a photograph that had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases were white lines. 6 people in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning like they owned the world. They looked impossibly young, the way soldiers always look young in photographs taken before the weight of what they've seen settles into their faces permanently. "That's Jessica Rodriguez," Cross said, pointing to a woman with short blonde hair and eyes that were already older than her face. "Best communication specialist I ever worked with. Could establish contact with anyone, anywhere, using equipment that shouldn't have worked and determination that always did. Kid from Texas who sent half her pay home to her grandmother every month." She pointed to the next face. "Amanda Chin, computer specialist from California who could hack anything with a laptop in 15 minutes. Looked like she should be in college somewhere, but I saw her disable an entire enemy communication network while under fire." Each face got a story. Each name got remembered. Lisa Walsh, the medic from Boston who'd saved more lives than she'd taken and considered that a point of professional pride. Jennifer Park, the sniper from Oregon who could put a round through a dime at 600 meters and never bragged about it. Michelle Stevens, the demolitions expert who could thread a needle with C4 and had a laugh that could lighten the mood even in the worst situations. "They were good people," Cross said finally, folding the photograph carefully and putting it back in her wallet. "They deserved better than what they got." Maria listened to every word, every story, every detail about operations that had never officially happened but had saved American lives and disrupted terrorist networks that would have caused devastating attacks if they'd been allowed to continue. She listened to stories about nights spent motionless in hostile territory, about missions that went perfectly according to plan and missions that went completely sideways and had to be salvaged with improvisation and pure stubborn refusal to quit. About the weight of keeping secrets and the heavier weight of carrying the memory of people who died believing their country would remember their sacrifice. "What happened?" Maria finally asked. "In Syria?" Cross was quiet for a long time. "We found something we weren't supposed to find. And some people decided it was easier to bury us than deal with what we discovered. But you survived." "I survived. They didn't. And every day for 15 years I've tried to figure out if that makes me lucky or cursed." 2 months later, when a crisis erupted that required exactly the kind of skills Sarah Cross had spent 15 years developing and 15 years trying to forget, the call came to the janitor's closet. Not to Echo 6, not to Lieutenant Commander. To the woman who'd been invisible so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. The facility was under investigation, not because of an external threat, but because of an internal one. Someone had been using the secure networks to run unauthorized operations, selling classified information to hostile actors, using American intelligence assets for personal gain. Sound familiar? The investigation had stalled because whoever was responsible knew the systems too well, had access that was too high level, and was covering their tracks with the kind of expertise that only came from years of working inside the machine. They needed someone who could think like the enemy because she'd been forgotten by the people who'd created that enemy in the first place. Someone who understood how the system worked because she'd helped build it, and who understood how it could be broken because she'd been broken by it. "We need you," Admiral Hayes said, standing in the doorway of the supply closet. Cross looked up from the inventory sheet she'd been filling out, the same inventory sheet she'd filled out every Wednesday for 3 years. "No," she said simply. "You need Echo 6. And Echo 6 is dead." "What if I told you the person we're looking for was involved in what happened to your team?" Cross's hands stopped moving across the paper. She looked up at Hayes with those green eyes that had seen too much and learned too little about letting go. "I'd say you're 15 years too late. What if I told you she's not finished? That she's been using her position to get people killed? American soldiers. People like the women you served with." Cross set down her pen very carefully. "Then I'd say you'd better tell me everything." And for the first time in 15 years, Sarah Cross stopped mopping floors and started hunting. The operation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Cross moving through the facility like the ghost she'd trained to be, observing patterns, cataloging behaviors, identifying weaknesses in security protocols that hadn't been updated since before she'd started pushing a mop cart through these hallways. The target was Deputy Director Catherine Kellerman, a woman who'd built her career on the graves of better soldiers and funded her lifestyle with the blood money of betrayed operations. A woman who'd been selling American secrets for so long that she'd forgotten they weren't hers to sell. A woman who'd been one of the 2 civilians in expensive suits who'd given Sarah Cross a choice that wasn't really a choice 15 years ago. Kellerman had gotten sloppy. Success breeds overconfidence, and overconfidence breeds mistakes. She'd been using the same communication protocols for years, routing payments through accounts that were secure but not invisible, meeting with contacts in locations that were private but not unobservable. All things that a woman trained to notice patterns would eventually notice, given enough time and motivation. The takedown happened on a Thursday night. Kellerman was leaving her office late, heading to a car that would take her to a meeting that would never happen with people who would never arrive. Because Sarah Cross had spent 3 weeks learning Kellerman's routines. And tonight, those routines were going to change permanently. FBI agents were waiting in the parking garage. So were investigators from Naval Intelligence, the CIA, and departments that didn't have names or business cards. Evidence had been gathered. Accounts had been traced. Communications had been intercepted. All of it legal. All of it admissible. All of it devastating. When Kellerman saw Sarah Cross standing in the shadows near her car, recognition flickered across her face like lightning. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. "So are a lot of good women," Cross replied. "But only one of us deserved it." Kellerman went quietly. People like her always do when the game is finally over and the only choice left is how they want to be remembered. The facility returned to normal within a week. New security protocols were implemented, background checks were strengthened, and the investigation expanded to identify anyone else who might have been part of Kellerman's network. Sarah Cross went back to mopping floors. But word had spread through certain channels about the janitor who'd helped bring down a 15-year conspiracy. About the ghost who'd come back to finish a mission that had started in a compound on the other side of the world. Maria Santos, who'd been promoted to instructor since their first meeting, made a point of stopping by the facility whenever her duties brought her to the area. Not for official business, just to check in on a veteran who'd become something like a mentor, even if neither of them would have used that word. "You could have anything you wanted now," Maria said one evening, finding Cross in her usual spot, restocking supplies with methodical precision. "Full reinstatement, back pay, Medal of Honor probably." Cross smiled slightly. It was the first time Maria had ever seen her smile. "I've got everything I need." "What's that?" "A job that matters, stories that got told, and the knowledge that sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to." Maria nodded, understanding more than she'd understood when this all started. "Your team would be proud." Cross looked at her and something in her expression had changed. The weight was still there, that would never go away, but it was different now. Shared, maybe, or at least acknowledged. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think they would be." 6 months later, Sarah Cross retired from her position as maintenance supervisor at Carson Military Research Center. Not because she was forced to, but because she was ready to. Her replacement was a young veteran named David Martinez, a former Army intelligence analyst who'd lost his arm to an IED in Afghanistan and needed a job that would let him serve his country without requiring him to carry a rifle anymore. Cross trained him personally, showing him not just how to clean the facility but how to observe it. How to notice patterns. How to see things that other people missed. "Why are you teaching me this?" he asked one day. Because invisible doesn't mean powerless, she said. Sometimes it means the opposite. On her last day, Maria Santos showed up with a gift, a small metal plaque, the kind that might sit on a desk or hang on a wall. Read. The best soldiers are the ones you never hear about. The best victories are the ones that never make the news. The best service is the kind that expects no recognition and gets none. Below that, in smaller text, in memory of Devgru Echo, who served in silence and died in shadow, but whose sacrifice echoes in the freedom of those who never knew their names. Cross held the plaque for a long time, running her thumb over the engraved letters. Thank you, she said finally. Thank you, ma'am. And for the first time in 15 years, Sarah Cross didn't correct the title. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room has already done the loudest things. And sometimes, when the world forgets about you, that's exactly when you're needed most. Sometimes being invisible is the most important job of all. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to subscribe. There's another powerful veteran story waiting right here. Click to watch it and let me know in the comments. Have you ever met someone who turned out to be far more than they seemed?